Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today we're going to talk about the best. As we're getting into that holiday shopping season, a lot of people are asking, what's the best filter, what's the best light, what's the best air pump, what's the best food, what's the best CO2 regulator? The answer to that is kind of surprising, so let's talk about it. Let's start with filters. What's the best filter? Maybe we need to bring that down. What's the best hang-on-back filter? What's the best sponge filter? Is it the Aquarium Co-op Core Sponge? Is it the Swiss Tropicals Poré Foam Sponge filters? Sure. Any of those. The answer to what's the best anything, whether it's a light, a filter, a heater, a pump, is all dependent on your situation. I know. Not the answer you're looking for. You're like, Debbie, just tell me the one thing I need. And that's not how it is. Let's give an example. The tank behind me has a Beamswork light, a Fluval FX6, a Penguin 350B hang-on back. It's an older tank. It's got some of the best substrate you can get. Amazonia, right? AVA. But the thing is, it's all about the application. The best is 100% dependent on what your application is, because maybe it's what's the best light for $60 or less? What's the best light, period? Well, if you're only keeping like Anubias and Java Fern or Swords and Crips, these low light requirement plants, you don't need the best light. The best light is probably way too powerful. Now, can you dim it down? Does it have lots of sweet features that make it amazing and cool? Yes. But even my favorite light, the Fluval 3.0, is way too powerful if you're in like a 20-gallon long with a bunch of low light requirement plants. You don't need a super powerful light for that tank. You just don't. What's the best filter? Well, if you're having a 20-gallon long, you don't need an FX6 on that thing, right? And if the sponge filter is your go-to filter, that's the best filter in your mind, you might need something with a little more oomph than just a couple sponge filters on something like a big 100-plus gallon tank like this one behind me. It's all about your situation. Do you have a really lightly stocked tank that has mature plants? You might not even need a filter at all. If you've only got 6 neon tetras in a 20-gallon tank that's been planted for 3 years, you probably don't need a filter. You probably just need a little bit of water movement from either a little power head or an air stone. You could maybe have an undergravel filter, build like a plenum style system. You don't need a power filter. You don't need a canister filter. Are these things nice to have? Do they give you some benefit? Of course. But do you need them? No. So are they the best no matter what? No. In almost every situation in which we are looking at things for a fish tank, whether we are starting fresh or maybe looking at making some updates, like an old tank like this where that light's a lot dimmer than it used to be, the filter might not be enough, or maybe it's like me when I first had this tank, it kind of only had that little hang-on back, so I added an FX6 to make sure it had bigger filtration capacity because I knew I was going to put a lot of fish in this tank. At one point, this tank had over 30 rainbow fish in it, plus a bunch of tetras and white clouds and danios, so I needed something with higher capacity just to ensure that despite it had very robust plant growth, I wanted to be absolutely certain the water quality was good, right? Was the FX6 the best option? Yes and no. I found a used one at a really great price, so that made it the best option. If I was buying new, I might have looked at just multiple hang-on backs because it's much easier to service. I can service one a week, and then I would be in a really good routine instead of having this big canister filter that I only service every so often. This is the same for things like lights. You know, lights often can be way more powerful than we actually need them. So how do you determine the best of each thing? What's the real answer, Bentley? If it's not a single product, then what's the answer? How do I figure out what is the best? first things first, what are the requirements of your tank? If you have a heavily stocked tank that is larger, let's say 40 gallons or larger, you probably want to look into some kind of larger powered filter to help you. Doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a canister filter. It could be something like the AquaClear 110, the Tidal 110, the 75 and 70 respectively, maybe, if you don't need something as big. It's all dependent on your stocking levels and the size of the tank. If you have a much smaller tank and you're going to lightly stock it, or even a very big tank and you're going to lightly stock it, you could probably do well with just sponge filters and not have to worry about it because you don't need a really excessive biocapacity. Now, maybe you're dealing with a fish that really appreciates higher flow. Then you might want to look into something that creates more flow, even if a sponge filter is all the biocapacity you need. You might need to look at, maybe you want to do like the power head just to move extra water, right? That creates that flow you need, but you could still have an easier filtration system with something like just a sponge, or maybe one of those little internal filters like the CJ Shark, or Fluval's got their version. There's a bunch of different ones, right? You don't necessarily need something crazy. You don't have to put an Owaze Biomaster on a 20-gallon tank just because the particular fish you have likes a little bit of flow. Can you? Of course. You want to go crazy? Go nuts. You don't need to, though. Let's talk about lighting. How do you figure out the best light? It's all about your plants. Are your plants all low light requirement plants? Then you probably don't want a super powerful light. If you're wanting to do high CO2 and a lot of very demanding plants like Ludwigia White or Tornado, some of those really fancy Rotalas, maybe you're doing the White Anubiases, all these kind of like really nice high-end plants, you're going to need a fairly powerful light. Now you need to start looking at something like a Chihiros, a UNS Titan, the ADA Solar RGB, an ONF Flat One, etc., etc., etc. All these really high-end, very powerful aquarium lights. But if you're dealing with mostly crypts and like Java ferns and Anubiases and Booses, you probably don't need much more than about medium light. And then you might be good to save yourself a little bit of money and look at something like Higer or JCNP, Aquaneat, etc., etc. So there's a lot of them, right? Phoenix Stingrays, right? Simple light, but you know what? It's really good on a lot of tanks, and it gives you decent medium light. You don't need something extreme if the plants don't require it. If the plants are very simple and don't have high demand, and you give them a super powerful light, you're just setting yourself up for failure with a ton of algae. My tank went off behind me while I was talking. Can you tell I'm filming late at night? But that's it. What it comes down to is it's not necessarily about what is the best. And yes, I know you're going to be like, in the comments, Bentley, you put out videos. What's the best X? Yes, that's part of reviewing products. But the thing is, when we walk into any of these situations where we are creating a tank from scratch and we are trying to set it up for success, long-term success, not set it up right, not set it up the best, not set it up just good enough, it comes down to what is the demand for our tank based on stocking, plants if we're going planted. If we're not doing plants, we need to account for that too, right? Because that means we're losing some of that surface area and natural filtration. We might need to look at more assistance in the filtration side of things. This is stuff that we need to look at and prepare for as we're building our tank. Is budget something that impacts us? Then we look for the places where we can save. Maybe the fish we're keeping don't have to be at 80 degrees, right? So we can possibly look at either an unheated or a less powerful heater to get a tank heated to the right temperature, but still save a little bit of money so that we can maybe get that slightly nicer filter. Or maybe it's without powered filters. We're using sponge filters to save us money so we can get a slightly better light, so that we can do some of those more medium and maybe just the early stage of high light demand plants, so we can get that nice, like a Fluval 3.0 or, there's a lot of great lights out there that are all similar in price range, Phoenix 24/7s, etc. Comes down to your budget and the demands of your tank. And most importantly, when we build a tank, we should really look at the demands of the tank first. Not what's best, not what's worst, whatever it may be. Look at the demands of your tank. A similar thing, let's go outside of what the tank needs for equipment and talk about like fish food. What's the best fish food? If you have the best fish food, whatever that may be, let's say it's baby brine shrimp, right? Baby brine shrimp, we all know, very successful. Lots of breeders use it. But if you have a single tank that only has 5 fish, you probably don't have enough requirement to keep making live baby brine every day. They're not going to eat enough of it, so you're wasting your money there. You'll probably do okay with just like frozen baby brine, and maybe you give that every other day, or you find some other solution that gives them really good food, but isn't in excess and wasting, because that can lead to bigger problems down the line, whether that's in your budget, whether it's causing algae outbreaks, whether it's causing ammonia spikes because there's too much food, whatever it may be. Adapt to the demands of your tank. Is your tank full of carnivorous fish? You probably can't feed them a very vegetable-heavy diet. They probably need higher protein. So instead of maybe feeding them a spirulina food, you might have to look at something like the extreme krill flakes, or you got really big fish. Feeding them nano food is not going to do. You might have to look at something like massivore pellets. These are examples of how if you don't meet the demand, you can run into issues. You're going to huck in tons and tons of that nano food if you're feeding some big like silver arowana, when realistically maybe they only need a massivore pellet or 2, right? Something simple and easy, and yet it ends up being the best solution. The best is not about cost or necessarily quality. It's about what meets the combined needs of the environment you are attempting to create. That's what the best is. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it gives you a little insight. Maybe it gives you a different perspective on how to set up your next aquarium. I'd like to hear from you. What do you think? What are your thoughts? Did I miss something? Is there something that I think I've got wrong? Clearly there is the best. Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a little like. Maybe share it out to a friend who's setting up their next tank and they need some advice, they need some help. Maybe this is the exact right direction to point them. As always, folks, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.